So today we'll be starting our series on creating a data warehouse in Azure. This is part one of the series, so we'll be focusing on the architecture of the solution. That will include creating an Azure subscription, a resource group, an Azure storage account to house all of our incoming data files, an Azure SQL Server and SQL Database to house the processed data, an Azure Data Factory to pull the data from the storage account into the database, and then linking all three together. So the first step will be to open a browser and to navigate to the Azure portal, which can be found at portal.azure.com. And if you haven't already signed in, you'll be prompted to sign in with a Microsoft account. From there, we'll be creating a subscription first of all. So at the top, we can just search for subscription and go into subscriptions there and hit add. You can name this subscription anything you like, and if you don't already have a billing account set up, you'll need to do that as well, and that's just where you add your credit card details. Everything we'll be doing in this demo will be either no cost or very low cost. There is also an option, if you haven't already used it, to create a free trial within Azure, where they give you 12 months of free resources. You still need to add your credit card information, but they won't charge it unless you exceed the free trial. So I'm going to go ahead and review and create that. We can see here it's creating the subscription now. Once that's done, the next thing we're going to look at is creating a resource group within the subscription. And what a resource group is for is essentially just grouping the resources together that you have in your subscription. So you may have more than one project on the go, and this is a good way of just grouping everything together so that you can see everything all in one place and control it all as one entity. So there we go. So now we have our demo subscription. So within that, we can go to our resource groups, and we have no resource groups yet. We can go ahead and create one. And you want to make sure that it's linked to the subscription you just created. And again, you can name this resource group anything you like. And here is the first time that we're seeing region mentioned. The region is important. It's recommended that you select the region that is geographically closest to the majority of your users, and for me that's Canada Central, so I'll leave that as is. Go ahead and create that. There we go, there's our new resource group created. We can navigate to that. And within that, this is where all of our resources will appear once we start creating them. So the first resource we want to create is a storage account. So in the top here, we can search for storage and go to storage accounts. And once we're there, we can go ahead and create a storage account. Make sure that you've got your previously created subscription and your previously created resource group there. And we can name this storage account again anything that we like. Again, make sure your region is set to the one that's geographically closest to you. You probably want to keep all of your resources within one resource group assigned to the same region as that resource group. For preferred storage type, I'm going to go ahead and pick Azure Blob Storage or Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. Performance is standard, and keep the redundancy to GRS. We're going to go next to the Advanced tab, and the only thing we're going to change here is Enable Hierarchical Namespace. What that's going to allow us to do is to create a folder structure similar to how you would have it on your desktop, and it just makes it easier to navigate and to organize the files. In the Networking tab, we're going to have public access enabled, but only from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. And we're going to add our client IP address. What that's going to do is mean that only the resource can only be accessed via your IP address. So it just adds a layer of security to your storage account. So go ahead and add that now. And then we can go ahead and review and create. And go ahead and click create. That's now deploying. And the deployment is complete. So we can go to our resource. And from here, we can go to Data Lake Storage, or we can go Storage Browser, brings us to the same place. And we can see our containers here. Now this logs is automatically generated, but you can go ahead and add containers, which are essentially just folders to this storage account, and you can nest those folders as you go down and add files. We'll be adding to this in a later video. So the next thing we need to create is our SQL Server. So we're going to go ahead and search for SQL and SQL Server and create. Again, make sure you've got your subscription and your resource group selected, and I'm just going to go ahead and say so this server name is the first name that we'll be giving a resource that needs to be globally unique. So it doesn't just have to be unique within your own subscription or your own resource group, it has to be unique amongst all Azure servers. So again, we want to make sure that our location is set to the same as the rest of the stuff in the resource group. So Canada Central. The authentication method, we want Microsoft Entra only authentication. So the one thing we have to do is make sure we set the admin, and you can set that to anybody you like. I would suggest setting that to yourself. So I'm going to go in and pick my demo user here. We're going to then go to networking, and we're going to allow Azure services and resources to access this server. That will become important later once we create our data factory. It's going to allow our data factory to connect to our SQL Server. Once that's done, we'll hit review and create. And you can see here, it estimates the cost for us, and just for the server alone, there's no charges. That's deploying now. Once that's deployed, we'll need to add a database to that server. Okay, so now that that's deployed, we can go to the resource, and we can see there are no databases currently in this server, so we're going to go ahead and create a database. Now you may be offered a free SQL database within that server. I would recommend for this purpose that you select that. It's more than enough resources for most purposes. So you can see here you've got 32 gigabytes of data allowed to be stored and 100,000 vCore seconds for processing. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that offer now. Then have to pick a database name, and this just has to be unique within the server itself. Under networking, we're going to add our current client IP address, and that's just going to make sure that, again, we can access the database. So there are two levels to that. We already did that once on the server, but we need to do it again on the database. What that allows is you can have IP addresses only accessing particular databases within your server. For this purpose though, we want to make sure that we can access this database, so we're going to go ahead and hit yes on that one. And we can go ahead and review and create. You can see here again, estimated cost is 0 per month. And one important part here is the overage billing. So if you go over this amount, what's going to happen is the database will pause and you won't be charged, but you will no longer be able to use the database until your next month comes along and you get your allocated amount again. So that is now deployed. So we can go and check that out. Not much to see at the moment. We haven't added anything to the database. We'll be doing that in a later video. The final component that we need is our data factory. So we're going to search for data factory here. And we want to make sure that we pick data factories v2. And we can go ahead and click create. Again, make sure we pick our correct subscription and a correct resource group. So we can go ahead and pick a name. This name has to be globally unique. And make sure that the region is set to the same as everything else within your resource group. And we can go ahead and review and create. And once that's validated, just go ahead and hit create. That's now deploying. And once that's deployed, we're going to go into Data Factory to configure the link between Data Factory and the storage account and Data Factory and the SQL database. So once the Data Factory is created, we'll navigate to it here by going to our Data Factories and click on the one that you just created. And you have to launch a separate studio to go in and edit the components within Data Factory. So we'll go ahead and do that now. It's going to open a separate tab. We want to keep this tab open because we're going to need to come back to that later. And once we have that open, we can just close these pop-ups here. The first thing we want to do is on this left-hand side, there are a number of different tabs, but the one we're interested in is the Manage tab. From there, we want to navigate to Link Services, and we're going to create a new link service. We're going to search for storage, and we're going to select Data Lake Storage Gen 2, which is the component that we created earlier. From there, we can give this linked service a name, and what we're going to do is change the authentication type from account key to a system assigned managed identity. That's going to create this managed identity name that we're going to need later on. We're going to select the subscription that we created earlier and the storage account that we created earlier. Now, what we can do is we can test this connection right away, and that is going to fail. The reason that has failed is we need to give permission to Data Factory to access the storage account. So we're going to make a note of this managed identity name, and we can actually go ahead and just copy that directly from here. We're going to navigate back to our previous tab and go to our storage account. Once we're in our storage account, we can go to the networking sidebar, which is here, security and networking, and under public network access, we're going to click manage, and we scroll down to see resource instances here. So we're going to specify that our Azure Data Factory resource can access this storage account. So we're going to find Data Factories, and we're going to select the Data Factory that we just created, and we're going to save that. Now if we go back to our Data Factory and hit test connection again, that is going to fail again because we need one more configuration. So we'll go back to our storage account, and the last thing we need to do is within access control. So here is where we can give all of the users that we have different levels of access to the storage account. So that means in terms of read-write access. So the system assigned managed identity that was created earlier, that is treated as a user for this purpose, and so we need to give that user the correct permissions. So what we're going to do is add a role assignment. The level of access that we want to give is called storage blob data contributor. And as you can see here, it allows for read, write, and delete access to Azure storage blob containers and data, which is exactly what we want. So we'll select that one and go next. We're going to assign access to a managed identity, and we'll select our members. And make sure you've got the correct subscription, and we want to have the data factory managed identities. You may have more than one at this stage. If you've been following along with just this demo, you will just have one here. And we're going to pick our managed identity from before. And as you can see, this managed identity name here lines up with this managed identity name here. So we know we've got the right one. We're going to select that. And we're going to review and assign it. That's now been added successfully. So if we go back to our link service for a final time and test the connection. So you may need to wait a few moments for the connection to become successful, but you can see now we have everything we need for that to be a successful connection. So we're going to go ahead and create that. So this is now our link that allows the data factory to pull data from the storage account that we created. The second thing we're going to do is create another link service that is going to allow Data Factory to access our SQL Server, so that once it's pulled the data from the storage account, it can push it into the SQL Server. So again, we're going to create a new link service, and this time we're going to search for SQL, and we're going to add an Azure SQL Database. Again, call this link service whatever you like, but make sure that you are selecting your previously created subscription and the server that we created before, and again the database we created before. The authentication type, again we're going to use a system assigned managed identity, and it will be the same managed identity that we had before. What we can do now is we can test this connection, and it is going to fail immediately. So what we now need to do is we'll make a note again of this managed identity name, and we'll go back to our Azure portal. We're going to navigate to our SQL database. And from here, we're going to go to the query editor. And if you have SSMS or Azure Data Studio, feel free to use those tools. But just in the spirit of keeping everything on the browser here, we're going to use the query editor. And we're going to log in with Microsoft Entra. And from here, what we need to do is create a user within our database that aligns with the managed identity that we created before. So we can do that using this query. We can go ahead and run that now. That's succeeded. And then if we were to go back to our data factory and test the connection again, we can now see that the connection is successful. So I'm going to create that link service, and we now have our data factory linked to our storage account and to our SQL database. So I'm going to go ahead and publish those changes. That's now finished publishing. So now we have the three core components to our architecture for our Azure Data Warehouse solution. So we have our storage account, our data factory, and our SQL database. So for part 2 of our series, we're going to be creating a parameterized pipeline within ADF to pull the data in from our storage account and put it into our SQL database. And that will include creating the ADF pipeline itself, adding an event-based trigger, creating some hierarchical folder structure within the storage account, and creating some SQL queries to handle that data once it's arrived.